Welcome to ENT316. We're going to talk about what's new in the AWS Modernization toolset for Microsoft Workloads. My name is Murtaza, and I have my two colleagues with me presenting today. Harsh.
Gerald.
In this session, we are going to talk about modernization and its benefits. We'll talk about what modernization is, how it can help enterprises. What you're going to experience in this session is that we're going to take a fictitious enterprise, a representative of our customers, as an example, talk about the business needs of that organization. And my colleague, Gerald, would be playing the role of the CTO of that organization. And Harsh and myself are product managers answering questions that Gerald may have in terms of how to help meet the business needs, the technical needs, how to take the application through the transformation process, and how it aligns with the business goals of the organization. What you will see is a dialogue between us and the CTO of a representative customer enterprise in terms of how those conversations happen and what we recommend in terms of the journey, the tooling, and taking the applications through that workflow of transforming the entire portfolio. With that, let's perhaps hear from Gerald what this organization does and what the business needs are.
So I really appreciate you, Harsh, and Murtaza coordinating this meeting so that we can talk about our journey. And just to set the context and set the stage, we at any organization, what we do is we essentially create or simplify the process for authors, because what we do is we are an online bookstore and we have a marketplace, and we simplify the process for authors to publish their amazing content for readers. Essentially, of late, we've known that we can take advantage of more opportunities in the market, and what we want to do is transform that marketplace to be able to introduce AI to make it easier for our authors to be able to publish. Anytime they do publish their content, what essentially they're going to do is be able to publish that in 11 languages to cover more users and more readers across the globe. A bit about our architecture and our application portfolio. Essentially, 95% of our workloads are built in .NET, and those .NET applications are hosted on Windows Server and also backended by SQL Server. So some things that we've recently accomplished is we've had an acquisition, and that acquisition has introduced new business opportunities for us. However, we've also had some challenges too, because we have an operations kind of lag for us, so to speak, where it's hard for us to roll out our new changes and new features because we have some stale technical techniques and software techniques that we have in place. So we have to improve on that so we can be reliable in getting content out and getting changes out faster. Also, we've gotten board approval, which is key for us. However, one thing that they've noted is that they're only going to provide funding for 85% of what we've budgeted this modernization strategy that we're going to be going through. So how we're going to basically make up the difference is in finding optimizations in what we do in terms of our design, and then being able to reinvest those optimizations to cover that remaining 15%. So looking for the partnership with you all to be able to achieve those business objectives.
I see. So what I am hearing from you is very typical of what we hear from customers in terms of reducing cost, optimizing, and finding the investments so that you can move forward in terms of leveraging latest technologies in terms of AI, ML,
exactly.
Generative AI, large language models. And the starting point of that is typically modernizing your architecture, modernizing to open source alternatives, modernizing to purpose-built cloud services. So I'd love to hear from you. Have you explored modernization, and if you have put a thought on it?
Definitely, it's something that we've had to do as an organization. We had to level set the understanding of what modernization means to any organization. And essentially, we've settled on the fact that we have to train our teams so that they're thinking about using higher level cloud services, and so that they can use those services to be able to take a reliable approach at getting new deployments out faster, and then also being able to meet the needs of our business teams who are trying to meet the needs of our authors in our marketplace.
Yeah, that's pretty spot on in terms of what we hear from customers and the discussions that we have in terms of taking the architecture to a state that can be easily scaled, is more performant, is more cost effective, and that means leveraging purpose-built cloud services, going on a journey. It's also important to understand that it's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous process, and you can keep on optimizing and modernizing and transforming your application and along with it your business so that you can ship more features. You can, some of the things that you shared about revenue and other things, those come together along with how your application behaves.
Right.
And some of the things that we are hearing from customers is very similar in terms of the interest for modernization. We are hearing, there is huge growing interest in terms of where modernization stands in the order of priority. You can see, 84% of customers, they're saying that this is one of the highest priority thing that they're considering in the next 2 years. And the other shift that we're seeing is that while this has been a consideration for application owners, software architects, et cetera, for a long time, folks like you, CXO, and the leaders, we are increasingly seeing them being more interested in the modernization of the technology stack because it aligns with the business objectives. And I'd like to share an IDC research that says that how modernization can help. Customers can modernize either while they're migrating to the cloud, they can modernize along with migration, or they can do it later. They can migrate as is without any change to the form factor of their application, and from there, deepen the use of purpose-built cloud services and open source software. So there is a lot of flexibility, and we are going to talk about the different ways in which we can achieve those things. But tell me, Gerald, your team has explored modernization. What's stopping you from undertaking this journey? What are the challenges that your team is facing?
It's a good question. I mean, as we think about modernization, we're faced with some decisions that we have to make, and then we're also faced with some challenges that we're expecting. One of the challenges that we're expecting is around cost, funding. What's going to be the TCO? How do we make this known to our CFO of the business in order to continuously get support for this? Also, challenges around licensing. We have various licenses, we have relationships with various folks, and we need to account for those licenses. What can we use, and how do we deal with that going forward? And some decisions that we have to make are, what's our journey? Like, how are we going to take this journey forward? What are the things that we think we need to do? And we don't want to make mistakes. That's why we're looking to you to use your past experiences to take us forward. And while we understand this from the executive team in terms of why it is that we should be thinking about modernization, but helping us get that story across to our engineering team, so collectively we're moving forward, with across the culture.
Certainly, we will work together on this as we work with your teams in this journey. But to get started, and maybe as a starting point, what are the key challenges that are hindering the teams from getting started?
I think help us modernize, help us get that story out, help us establish our journey, and then also what's next? What do we do next? Where do we begin?
I see. So let me invite Harsh to talk about why modernize.
So Gerald, you shared some interesting insight about your business. Seems like you are trying to capitalize on some of the changes happening in technology world. You want to optimize cost. Seems like 95% Microsoft Workload, .NET applications, and SQL Server, right? You also mentioned you want to achieve some efficiency in your software development areas, right? So modernization really can help you provide you benefits in 4 areas. First, let's look at the cost saving. You can utilize optimal infrastructure. You can use cloud solution efficiently and only pay for what you use. You can reduce overhead instead of utilizing on-premises resources. You can reduce that and hence minimize your physical infrastructure need as well as maintenance and the power usage. It can provide you business agility. Seems like you wanting to utilize some of the AI, ML technologies, it can accelerate time to market for you. You can utilize cloud solutions, deploy them swiftly, and that gives you a competitive advantage in the marketplace. You can adapt fast. Depending on changes happening in the marketplace, you can scale your solution up or down and utilize those solutions and meet your business needs. You can have greater operational resilience. Traditionally, customers tend to utilize high availability and disaster recovery environment and spend a lot of money on it. You can use multi-region deployment and mitigate risk of going certain region going down, right? For disaster recovery, you can utilize automated backup and recovery mechanisms to avoid data loss, safeguard against data loss, and account for unforeseen events. And finally, it can actually improve your staff productivity. Your technical team can focus on what is most important to your business and focus on that aspect instead of maintaining infrastructure. You can build very collaborative environment and remove silos from team and build cloud solutions together. Now that you heard about some of these benefits from modernization, does that align with some of your objectives?
Definitely it does, because obviously, as you know, with an organization, revenue is important. And for 2024, we're going to be thinking about how we take our revenue opportunities and take advantage of our revenue opportunities, especially as I talked about the AI opportunity that we have ahead of us. Also, around DevOps, right? Helping us with our operations. You just called it out. All of those things definitely agree with. And then lastly, in terms of the reducing costs, licensing is that thing. We need help. And we're open to obviously hearing about open source, but we know about open source, but we want to hear some specifics. Sure. Right? We're always hearing the term and we dabble, but specifics. Want to hear about what you all have and what you can provide from your experience to help us offset some of our licensing costs by adopting some specific services that you can recommend.
Sure.
Sure. Let me talk about the journey that your teams can take. The typical modernization journey, and this we have built this with our experience working with customers for many years. We have been providing Windows, .NET, SQL Server on AWS, and over time, .NET has evolved to be more cross-functional and has enabled modernization as well. So what typically is the first step is the assessment, knowing, and that resonates with some of the challenges that you called out. What do I have in my environment? What are my prioritized applications? What are my crown jewels? And what pathways do I take for my applications? So it starts with the assessment of your environment and assessment of your organizational readiness in terms of any training needs, any skilling gaps that your team has.
That's going to be key, the training. Definitely need some help there.
And we have tools to help you with whether it is a discovery capability that runs across your environment to tell you what kind of applications you have across your portfolio, and also recommend pathways that your team can take in terms of taking them further in the journey of transformation.
Okay.
And once those things are there, the mobilize phase, the second phase, is about getting the organization ready. The technical needs in terms of pathways, the organization needs in terms of readiness, training, and putting together a plan so that the last phase, which is modernization, can be carried out swiftly. And that's where the execution happens, whether you are bringing applications from on-premises to the cloud, migrating and modernizing along the way, or you are taking an application which is already running on a cloud, on let's say, a virtual machine, and taking them further, deeper into a purpose-built service. So with that, let me talk about some of the pathways that your applications can take. You mentioned you have 95% .NET-based workloads, Windows workloads with stateful data on SQL Server. And that's what we typically see for Microsoft Workloads. If you're migrating, if you're running applications on premises, you can rehost them if you do not want to make changes as you migrate, or if you're in urgency to migrate. If you want to modernize, and all these pathways apply both whether you are on premises, you're migrating, or you're already running on the cloud and you want to go deeper into higher value architecture. So first one is rehost, then you can re-platform. Containerization and containers, they have become the de facto standards in terms of portability, in terms of efficiency of servers, in terms of even servicing, leveraging DevOps, CI/CD pipeline, even security to a large extent. And then for databases, you can move to managed services. Some of the things that Harsh talked about in terms of monitoring, in terms of disaster recovery. So the managed services have functionality where you can configure those over API, and your teams do not have to spend the time and effort for the operational work on that.
So one thing I want to just quickly check back on, you said around containers. We have really skilled, it's just a subset of our team, really skilled in understanding containers. And we want to be able to get the rest of our engineering staff to be able to be comfortable with it. If I'm jumping ahead, please let me know, but would like to really see if you have something that can kind of help us upskill to get folks to be able to get those containers deployed, while our really strong engineers can build that design strategy for what our future container design will be. So anything there you guys would be able to cover to see?
For sure. So the re-platforming pathway is to enable use cases like that.
Okay.
So re-platforming, what you can do in that pathway is that with minimal to no source code changes, you can take your application, package them by inspecting the binaries, inspecting the dependencies, creating a new package and deploy it on ECS, EKS, or Fargate.
Okay.
And that can help your team see how containerization can help you scale your workloads, be more performant, be more cost efficient, okay, while you make source code changes later to be more cross-platform.
Gotcha. Okay.
One thing to note, though, in re-platforming, since there's no source code change happening, it still remains reliant on the Windows infrastructure. And the later step, Refactor, is where you can port the code from .NET Framework to .NET Core, and you can make it compatible to run on Linux operating system.
Okay.
And you can even containerize them.
Gotcha.
Same goes for databases. You can go to manage databases and then go into purpose-built databases. You can even improve your architecture in terms of event-driven solution, event-driven architecture, leveraging all the services that AWS has to offer. So with that, why don't you talk about the different types of tooling options?
Yeah, so AWS likes to meet customer where they are. You have multiple options. You could start on your own, and you can work with partners. Partners develop their own tools. And AWS provide some tooling as well. These tools can help you accelerate your modernization journey. So with that, let me quickly provide you overview of some of the tools. AWS not only provides tools in each stages of the modernization journey, but also for each type of modernization recommendation, you can utilize tool to implement that modernization strategy. Now, we like to think modernization as a journey. For each customer, that journey could be different, right? Some of the modernization pathways could be simpler compared to other one, right? For Windows application modernization, here are some of the tools that we offer. Often customers ask us, hey, in new modernized state, how much it's going to cost me? What is my infrastructure cost? AWS Modernization Calculator offers you ability to quickly estimate modernized architecture infrastructure cost. Okay. You can work with solution architects. Your own architects work with AWS organization to figure out that modernized architecture suitable for you. Now, how many applications do you have in your portfolio?
We have about 110 or so applications.
Most small, medium, large organizations have 100+ applications. Modernizing all those applications, where do you start, right? Migration Hub Strategy Recommendation is the assessment tool that automatically assess your application portfolio and recommend modernization strategies. If you don't know where to start here.
Okay.
This is the tool that will enable you to find common patterns in your modernization journey.
Is that a onesie, twosie thing? Because the number I said, it's an enterprise grade, enterprise scale.
Absolutely. Strategy recommendation tool is created for enterprise grade application portfolio assessment.
Okay.
Right. Now, as you assess, tool provides you different modernization strategy, and it also suggests what tool to use to implement certain strategy. For example, you mentioned about containerization. App2Container is a tool, command line tool, that takes your ASP.NET or Java application, makes a container out of it. It even produces deployment artifact to deploy it in services like EKS, ECS, or App Runner. Right. Now, we talked about re-platform modernization strategy where A to C can help, right? In the refactor area, Porting Assistant for .NET is an open source tool. You can use that to assess your .NET application for the compatibility of .NET Core framework, where you can then take that application and run on Linux platform. By doing so, you are saving cost on operating system, right? Now, as your developer understand the compatibility aspect, what NuGet packages are incompatible, what APIs are incompatible, it gives you a starting point. Tool does heavy lifting for you. You will still have to do some manual work, but your developer can right away start in the tool called Toolkit for .NET Refactoring, where you can test some of that modification, deploy it in AWS service, and test your code. It's a Visual Studio extension.
That's nice. So it's easy for our folks to adopt because we're already used to Visual Studio on our side. So
absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely. Now, you also mentioned some of the things that you want to achieve as you are taking some of these new initiatives. Microservice Extractor is a tool helps you break down your monolith code into microservices, right? And I'm going to show some of that in our demo.
Okay.
Now, we've been talking to your team, just like Windows modernization tool, AWS also offer SQL Server database modernization tool. Let's quickly run down to some of these tools. DMS is a migration tool that helps you bring your database to AWS. While this migration is happening, the source database is running without any interruption, so there is no, it is reducing the downtime for applications that are depending on that database, and it supports almost all commercial and open source database and migrate data from on-premises to AWS environment. Now, Babelfish Compass is a tool. It's an open source tool. It's an assessment tool that assesses your TSQL, SQL, and DDL script for compatibility with Babelfish Aurora, right? AWS schema conversion tool helps you in predictably migrating your database to target database. So such as SQL Server can migrate to Aurora PostgreSQL. It not only converts the schema, but also all the database objects, stored procedure, views, function to the target database version. Now, next, replatforming assistant. You said a lot of SQL Server, Windows operating system. This is a scripting tool, helps you take SQL Server running on Windows environment to Linux environment. And finally, Babelfish Aurora for PostgreSQL enables you to run Microsoft SQL Server application with Aurora PostgreSQL. There is a translation layer that handles Microsoft TSQL queries and allows you to continue to work with open source as well as your existing application, removing dependency on drastic changes in your application. Now, 75 to 80% of AWS product roadmap is driven by customers like you, right? We've been innovating in this area. Recently, we've done some features in some of these tools. AWS Migration Hub strategy recommendation. Up until now, we required customer to provide source code access and database access for database analysis. Now we introduce a feature called binary analysis. Your .NET DLLs, we can look at it, do the binary analysis, and provide you the compatibility aspect for .NET Core portability. In order to assess some of your servers, we required ADS service dependency. You can also import some of server information through CSV file. Now, we just added a new collector. Strategy recommendation itself can act as a collector. It utilizes vCenter APIs to discover all your servers and then assess the processes running on that server. We recently added feature in app to container. As customer migrating from on-premises to AWS, they have option to containerize some of those applications, right? Porting assistant for .NET, we've heard a lot of customer having ASP web forms applications, as well as WCF applications. Porting assistant now helps you assess compatibility with Blazor, as well as core WCF aspect, right? And finally, this is a big one. AWS Microservice Extractor now can handle up to 50K classes for your monolith through microservice extraction effort. So pretty enterprise grade. So tools like Porting Assistant can help you start at a smaller application for a scale kind of discussion. Microservice Extractor to break down the monolith from all complex applications is the tool to go.
Thank you.
So what's important to note here is that we talked about the different phases earlier, assess, mobilize, and modernize, and these tools help along the journey. So binary analysis, it's a very important feature. To understand the incompatibilities of your existing application, whether they're running on-premises or whether they're running on virtual machines on AWS. Incompatibilities, you asked about open source earlier, whether they're compatible to run on Linux or not, whether they're compatible to run on containers or not. You no longer have to provide source code access. You can simply assess your environment, and it'll assess the binaries and provide you an incompatibility report if you're already in the cloud. And if you are on premises, it'll also provide you anti-patterns in terms of cloud readiness for your applications. And you asked about how do I help my team get more familiar with the containerization process. Now, not only can you re-platform your applications as you are modernizing them that are already running on cloud, but also on your way into AWS at the time of migration, you can do that. And the other two tools we are scaling out, we're adding more supportability, and with Microservice Extractor, it's now supports bigger scale. So With that, you see how they're coming together in terms of the journey, the tools, and coming to the aspect of readiness and skilling gaps that your teams might have. So we will work with you. We work closely with our partner teams, and with your teams we'll work as well, so that we can bridge any gaps that may be there in terms of the mobilize phase.
Okay. I think the tools, again, as CTO, I don't have that level of depth like the engineers, but I've heard them talk about the awareness of some of these tools. I think the one thing we want to understand is how much of this is self-service? How much can we do? How much can we be enabled? And then also, too, what are the any kind of cost or charges that we have to incur as we plan out, our funding?
Excellent question. All AWS modernization tools are self-service and with no additional cost to you. Okay. You only pay for some of the resources that you use in your AWS account.
Okay, and I think what also would be pretty cool too is just to kind of see some of this in action, like actually put it there. Any chance? Very
Absolutely.
Good. Very nice.
We're going to show you some of these tools in a brief demo. Let's just get started. All right, so we talked about AWS Modernization Calculator for Microsoft Workload. This calculator helps you estimate your modernized infrastructure cost. So you will see some of the things that this calculator can do in few easy steps. Now, this AWS pricing calculator is a very well-known brand. Customers knows about it. Right on the service page, there is a calculator link. I've been working with your team. NEO Books is a multi-tier website. So let's just look at some of the simple steps that you can take. So it takes the architecture pattern. It's a multi-tier app. We selected that. Let's go to, now here, you can answer some basic questions about usage characteristics. How's the application used? You can provide information like number of users, monthly users, how much data is there, and what is the projected growth. Right? We take that into account to then recommend you the modernized architecture size. This is the estimated size, and based on that, it suggests you some of the modernized architecture. So in this case, serverless using AWS Lambda, or you have container expertise, so there is EKS option, and of course, Amazon Elastic Container Service option. Now, you will notice there is learn more skill. That enables your team to understand some of the details of this architecture. It's a one-pager information, provides you information about the architecture may look like, what are the different services involved, what are some of the implementation steps that you need to worry about, making your team a little bit more educated in the process. Now let's go to the next step. Right on the next step, you can see the monthly cost for that architecture. Remember, this is estimate. So based on some of the conversation I had with the team, we model that. You can work with our AWS solution architect and fine-tune some of these things, right? You can see there is Aurora PostgreSQL compatible DB, right? Some of the additional services, Cognito, Fargate, and if you know what you're doing, along with AWS expert, you can actually change some of these parameters that can influence the cost of that infrastructure, right? And once you are satisfied, you can save this estimate, and the My Estimate page is where you can see the breakdown of all these services, right? And you can continue to build this estimate for number of other applications by adding new workload in it.
Gotcha.
Often customer asks us about support cost consideration. It allows you to add support cost, and you can see that support breakdown. So you can easily estimate, you can start building that, and you can estimate the cost of that infrastructure, right? And you can export this for offline viewing in Excel file, And you can even share with your team a link with AWS expert as well, making it much more transparent conversation.
What I like about this is this addresses that whole TCO discussion, like helping us figure out what, to prepare and budget and plan. Yes. And also, when you're working with the team, I saw some pricing up there. It looks to be about maybe 30% cheaper than what we are now, but like you said, it's an estimate, so we have to dive in a little deeper.
Absolutely.
But definitely going to be key in taking that. I like the exporting feature, because then we can have the conversation with our other decision makers and stakeholders.
Fantastic. Let's go to the next tool, which we are very excited, and that is Migration Hub Strategy Recommendation. It's the assessment tool that automatically assesses your application portfolio. This tool, let's quickly run through a demo of this tool. In AWS console, Migration Hub Strategy Recommendation service is located, as you can see there. And you can get started with 4 simple steps. Decide your data source, ADS service or import CSV file. Define your business preferences. What are some of the business goals you have? Maybe licensing cost reduction, optimization of infrastructure, things of that nature. Optionally provide source code access or database access, and then do the recommendation. Now, in this step, we are asking you to configure data source. So in this case, I have already configured ADS service as my source of bringing server in for the assessment. As I go on further, you can see I got NEO books servers. Now for the demonstration, I just have very few servers, but you can bring hundreds of servers for assessment purposes. Next, you can provide your business goals. Speed of migration, modernization infrastructure, licensing, reduction. These are business goals you can prioritize.
Okay.
And you may have preferences on application tier. You may want to pick certain AWS services for your application tier. For example, Fargate for container deployment, or similarly, for database, you may prefer to go to managed services. You may prefer to choose open source database such as Aurora PostgreSQL.
Okay.
Now, you can review all this and then ask for recommendation. Let's view the recommendation. Here's the dashboard. You can quickly see summary, application components, and servers that it assessed. I can see 33 components. As we saw, there were 3 servers it assessed, and I can already see there are recommendations such as 3 rehost, 4 replatform, and 7 refactor. So at this point, strategy recommendation already assessed all these servers, looked through all the processes, and figured out what are some of the modernization recommendation suitable for you, based on your business preferences, based on your application and database preferences, right? Let's look at quickly the application view. You can see there 25 applications it discovered, 4 IIS websites it discovered, and SQL Server as well. This view provides you strategies as well as anti-patterns. Anti-patterns are the things that may come in your modernization journey. These are some of the blockers that you may have to address, right? Now let's look at some of the websites, the IIS web apps we found. Let's filter on IIS. There we go. I see NEO books already there. Let's look at the recommendation. Let's click on the view details. You see it already identified the recommendation. And if you look at the strategy options, there are additional recommendations such as app to container, replatforming using app to container, and even for refactoring, porting assistant.
So this is good. This will give us that clarity of where we should begin and when it comes to replatforming, when it comes to refactoring, so that we're getting that guidance as opposed to trying to figure it out ourselves.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Similarly, for databases, it will provide you recommendation as refactoring using schema conversion tool.
Okay.
So again, if you don't know where to start, this is a great tool to start doing your assessment for your application portfolio. Now based on all these recommendations, let's dive deep into another tool called A2C, App to Container. Oh, and before I go further, I talked about anti-patterns, right? A2C strategy recommendation also provide you anti-pattern details. These are the blockers that you may have to address. And this is a JSON file. You can see some of those details as well.
Got it.
All right. Let's move on to next tool, a replatforming tool called App to Container. Like I said, this is a command line tool that helps you build containers. Now in this case, we are targeting one of the server where IIS application is running. There are 4 simple steps. First, we inventory the application by running inventory command. It will create an inventory.json file, which will have all the details about your app. In this case, NEO book site. It has a unique ID it assigned, and it also found the service as well. Now, once we find that service, these details, you run next command to analyze. Analyze will figure out all the dependencies and create a file called analysis.json. In this file, you will have details about the application dependencies. Let's peek into analysis.json file and run a command called extract. Extract command will produce a package for container. Let's look at the analysis. As this creates a package for container, now you have a container package that will be utilized, a zip archive. It has all the folder structure and dependency files. This is the analysis.json file where you can also specify the base image that you want to utilize. We just specified that. I go next. Now, let's just run the containerize command. At this time, it will create a Docker file, and it will also create deployment JSON file. Now, as you can see here, you can deploy your container to ECS or EKS. In this case, I have mentioned this to be ECS. You can specify your target VPC ID. And now, you can use this information to create app deployment artifacts. With this, it will actually create a container. It will put that Docker file into ECR registry. It will generate the ECS task definition for you. And it will create a YAML file, CloudFormation YAML file, that you can utilize to now deploy entire infrastructure in AWS. You can utilize deploy command, or you can use AWS console and utilize your CloudFormation template to deploy that infrastructure.
What I think is interesting about this is I kind of see it as like a checklist even for our team, where as you step us through what are the things that we should be thinking about, we can get that container built, and then it also educates us as we start to build containers in the future, we kind of get that flow and using this as a guide, so pretty cool.
Absolutely. Here's your container already running in the, your NEO book site is already running in the container. So again, 4 simple steps: discover, analyze, extract, containerize, create deployment artifacts, and deploy to AWS. Perfect. Let's briefly talk about porting assistant tool that helps you do the assessment of .NET application for compatibility with .NET Core. Now, this is an open source tool, right? Now, I worked with your team to figure out NEO book solution. Let's onboard that solution quickly. Porting assistant will assess that solution file and figure out .NET Core compatibly. I just onboarded your solution. Here we go, an EOBook solution. Assess. With this, assessment will figure out NuGet package incompatibility. It will figure out API incompatibility. And it will provide you a nice dashboard with all these details. It will also suggest you some of the things, the compatible NuGet packages that you can utilize, compatible API that you can utilize, right? In some cases, it will automatically do and also will provide you visualization of your projects. Right? And this gives you a starting point for your porting exercise. You may still have to do some manual work, including it will show you in the source file where some of these changes are required.
Okay.
Right? Now, with this, you can then plan your porting efforts and utilize tools like Toolkit for .NET Refactoring to test your ported code and deploy it in AWS services and verify that. So here, I'm showing you a quick porting exercise. You will still have to do some manual work, but at this point, all the project files are updated for some of the changes or NuGet package updates or API updates that's done in the solution. So again, a great way to start your porting effort with open source tool, no need for AWS account, so you can start small and then jumpstart your effort by utilizing some of these. Oh, it also produces CSV reports where you can quickly look at some of the incompatibility details on API and NuGet packages and start working towards it.
Okay.
Now, we talked about porting, two types of refactoring efforts, one with porting assistant, converting .NET Framework application into .NET Core. Now let's say you want to take your monolithic application and break it down into microservices. Microservice Extractor is a tool that helps you do that. Let's quickly see some of that, how it works. Again, same EOBook solution. We're going to onboard it. This tool also provides you ability to figure out .NET Core compatibility as well. It also provides you a visual graph of your solution. Let's look at that details. Again, similar view, NuGet packages incompatibility details. I can see there are 18 NuGet packages incompatible and several APIs. As you go on, you can focus on some of the APIs and incompatibility details on those APIs. That report is there. Now, it provides you a visual representation of your projects. You can see there are 3 projects here and helps you to build some of the independent pieces that you can turn into microservices. So now this visualization exercise helps you show the nodes, namespaces, dependencies in your source code. And that helps you to figure out which business logic you can take and create a microservice out of it. Let's look at the reference data service as one of the services that we want to make a microservice out of it. I just specified that as a microservice, as a group, a new group. Let's define that group and assign some color code so you can find out in the visual graph which service you are working on. As this shows you these details, you can also see what are some of the things that it is going to bring. So it will show you some of the dependencies for reference data service that you are about to create. That way you know some of the dependencies that it is going to bring in with you. Now let's just do extract and port on this new group. You can see we are defining this as a reference data service, a new microservice. You can define a target, in this case, .NET 8, and you can create new HTTP endpoint for this service. There we go. Microservice Extractor already created an extracted service, and it also provides you modified application code.
Okay.
Right. With this, you can start looking at that service through Visual Studio. Look at the project, which is .NET 8, which is, by the way, recently released like a few days ago. And AWS already provided that. This is the new endpoint that it created, new HTTP service endpoint. And if I go to existing application solution, it's already modified that to use that new endpoint. So this is a remote adapter that it created for the new endpoint. This is a facade in front of your microservice. And if you look at, here we go. Now, if you look at the config file, this you can utilize to now route all your new requests to this microservice.
Okay.
And this new controller now has all new references to this microservice call.
Okay.
So this is microservice extractor. Okay. Now, we've been working with your team just like Windows modernization tools. There are database tools as well. And we'll continue to work with that team to provide overview of some of these tools.
Thank you. I think, Murtaza, as we were talking before, seeing these things in action has been really good in terms of a demo. I think it would be cool, too, as we've been using the AWS well-architected framework to guide our design strategy. I think if you can kind of showcase what it looks like, what we have today, and what it would look like tomorrow for like a 3-tier workload, which we typically follow as our design model.
For sure. So what we have been working with your team, we have learned that your workloads typically follow this pattern where you have a web front end on Windows servers running IIS web applications with an autoscaler that can scale based on the load. Then you have your web service, which this web front end calls into, and it's a monolith with your bookstore application with listing the books, customers ordering them and making the payments for it. And then finally, your stateful data is hosted on SQL Server that's running on virtual machines. So you saw the various tools in terms of replatforming, using app-to-container, refactoring, using porting assistant for .NET, and then microservices extractor to break monoliths into microservices. All that applies here. Okay. And you can take them through a journey of transformation. You can, and I'm talking about the eventual destination of this application. After you have gone through the entire process, if you are not entirely re-architecting your application with the same 3-tier model, you can move your Windows application to Linux by removing the incompatibilities and then re-platforming it to run on Linux containers on EKS or ECS. And then you can scale using Carpenter, which automatically looks at the load that's coming in and takes care of the scaling process.
Okay.
And for your middle tier, which is your web service with the monolith, you can break that into separate microservices for the list, order, and pay function, because the performance, scale, and the cost needs may be different, and they can scale independently, even boost team productivity in terms of working independently on this solution separately. And finally, the database, it can go from SQL Server running on virtual machines to PostgreSQL on Aurora.
It's going to be pretty key for us. We see a lot of what you're showing is we're going to see a lot of opportunities to reduce our costs in terms of licensing, and also take advantage of, I like the specific call out to Aurora Postgres as a destination for our databases.
Well, we have several more artifacts. We have white papers that your team can access. The QR code is there. And as a starting point, whether you're starting with ascertaining the value of modernization, you can use the calculator, or if you're starting with the modernization process in terms of knowing what's in your environment and knowing what pathway to take, you can run with the strategy recommendation service and take your workloads further and transform them. And we are here to answer your questions. You can write to us. Our team's email is there. So please leverage these resources.
Really appreciate the time, folks, today to show us how we can start on our journey and it gives us the confidence that this partnership is going to get us there.
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank everyone for spending the time with us this evening. There are also related sessions. You can go to a workshop which talks about migrating, optimizing, and modernizing a Microsoft application in 2 hours. And then there is a case study on how Career Global is saving 40% with Windows containers on AWS. And please don't forget to fill the survey and let us know how we did.